Welcome to the Nordic Mythology podcast. I'm Daniel Farrand of the company Horns of Odin. As always, before we jump into the show, I do have to plug our Patreon. I know everybody's sick of hearing it at this point, but it's how we keep the show going. It is the lifeline of the show. If you can, pop over to patreon.com/Nordic Mythology podcast. Check out all the bonus material we have on there, mainly our Q&A episode we do with our guests every single week. We sit down for about 15-20 minutes after the show. The patrons get to ask questions, and a lot of the time there's stuff that me and Mags have missed. There's a lot of valuable information. If you like an episode, there will always be that bumper, little extra bit. A lot of the time they're a lot more loose. The guests kind of loosen up. We have fun. There are a lot of they're really lighthearted. So go and check them out. You get the whole back catalogue when you sign up, and it's all from £3 a month. So it's less than 10p a day. If you can't, then just a like, share, 5-star rating wherever you get your podcast. Really helps us bump up the ratings. Check us out on YouTube. Some guests do often bring their bring a nice little PowerPoint presentation, like our guest today, Ryan. And yeah, that's it. Let's get into the show, because this is a topic I've been banging on about for months, years maybe even. So I'm joined by my lovely in-house archaeologist, Mags Havgar.
Hello, everyone. Hope everyone's having a wonderful day.
Yeah, and our guest today is Ryan Eckerson. Ryan received a BA in linguistics from the University of Tennessee and an MA in Viking and medieval Norse studies from the University of Iceland. His master thesis, revealing Gifli's illusion, details the... Messed that up, didn't I? His master thesis, revealing Gifli's illusion, details the numerous celestial references in Gilfanging?
Gylfinging.
Yeah, Ryan's research suggests that many of the stories and mythological elements of Norse mythology can be seen in the night sky. So, for anybody who's listened to this podcast for any length of time, knows I've been saying for so long how I want to speak to somebody about space and Vikings. So we're finally going to do it. Ryan,
yes,
welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on your podcast. I really appreciate it. For any like budding scholar, this is like an opportunity to get our research out there, because there's a lot of countless hours, countless unpaid hours that go into research and things like this, especially at this level where it's not fully your career, but you're trying to take a step into making it your career. So anything that gets the research out there is awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Man, I feel that on a spiritual level. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Ryan. Those hours, man. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, but we are excited to talk to you today because, yeah, like Dan said, space and stars and Vikings and stuff.
Yeah.
Does anyone know anything about that? And he turned to me, which, would be, I do Viking Age archaeology. So I was like trying to rack my brain. I was like, I can't really think of anyone at the moment. And then he found you. And I was like, no way, here we go. Let's do it.
Oh yeah. Well, and as I'll show you, many of the references that we have to any sort of Old Norse constellations are definitely found after the Viking Age. But I think that many of the mythological references that tie in to the cosmos, they definitely come from an earlier time than when they were written. And so today, obviously, like I told you all, I don't want it to be necessarily a lecture, but I have prepared a slide that I think will at least give us talking points to move through, if you'd like for me to sort of start there.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, for anybody that's only listening, go to our YouTube and hit the little bell subscribe button so you can see when we get new episodes on there, because a lot of times guests do bring little tidbits, but a full
like
PowerPoint,
today.
Yeah, full PowerPoint presentation is up there with Leche Gidea, who always does this. So I'm excited for that. But this topic, I feel, is completely overlooked, because we've done 254, I think we're on now. And
you're really keeping count now, Dan. Good on you.
Yeah, I am, yeah. But I think we're on about 254, and I've never heard the night sky mentioned and maybe it has, but it's certainly not in any like real in depth. But yet, if you go out into nature, where what it would have been like without the light pollution we have today, the night sky is so prominent. You just only have to look up, and it's almost nauseating sometimes how kind of massive it all is. So I've
Absolutely.
always just thought there has to be something there. There has to be. They kind of just not looked up.
Absolutely. And I think you hit the nail on the head because, and our, how we interpret things now is based on the world that we're living in, right? So when we walk out, most of us live in a place that has some sort of light pollution, right? So we're not seeing the full night sky, and we're not brought up with this idea of, depending upon knowing the night sky to know when to plant things, right? Or when to go hunt for a specific type of animal, or, you know, what weather is coming next.
Hmm.
We just have an app for that, right? We can just look at our phone and we don't necessarily need to be in tune with that.
Hmm.
But yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I think that that's a great way of putting it.
Wonderful. Because I also feel as though in, I guess, older mythologies, there seems to be a big tie to the night sky. You think of like Greek mythology, I assume Roman mythology as well. There is that kind of link. There's stars named after it, but
Absolutely.
or constellations named after it, but
Oh
maybe
no,
stars
no,
as well.
absolutely. And you'll notice too that and as I'm about to show you, even the movement of those constellations mimics the mythological sort of relationship between those characters, as is the case between Orion and Scorpio.
Fun.
Uh,
Well, go ahead and
yeah.
share if you want to, Ryan.
Yeah. Yeah, so a lot of my research focuses on, of course, the star knowledge and Snorri Zeta. And you mentioned that in 254 episodes, the sky hasn't been really referenced one.
Hmm.
But it's funny because Snorri mentions it at least 94 times in Gylfaginning at
Hmm.
in the Edda, and I will show you that here in a second.
Is that the night sky or just the sky?
Yeah. There are 94 direct celestial references from what I've counted, and how I sort of started into this sort of presentation is to even talk about like why are we talking about the stars and like what celestial elements even exist inside of the really one of the main two manuscripts that we have that tell us about what we consider to be Norse mythology. And
Fun.
then,
I'm wondering before you even get into that, as like an intro, when you say like celestial elements, then what
yeah.
counts as a celestial element? Like, what would that be? If
So,
you come across a reference, what would that be?
so a celestial element is going to be anything that directly refers to the sky, the heavens, or a celestial body. So oftentimes in the Old Icelandic, you'll get a quotation saying, "This is á himni," this is in the heavens,
Mm-hmm.
or á lofti, in the air. You'll get certain names of beings or objects that have a celestial undertone.
Okay.
For example, the ox that Thor kills to go fishing with. Oftentimes, if you buy a compilation of Norse myths, the name of this ox is left out. But if you read it in Gylfaginning, the name of the ox is Himinhrótur, which could
Mm.
be taken as heaven flung or he who falls from the heavens in a loose way. Yeah.
Okay. So everything from constellations to singular stars to clouds to just the air itself to the sky would count as celestial elements, and then also things that have names connected to the sky.
Right.
Okay.
And so what I did is my research essentially focuses on, what celestial references are inside of Gylfaginning, and what does that tell us about the elements of Norse myth that are being associated with them. And I tied this into um, what star knowledge would have been present to people prior to and during the time of Snorri Sturluson, which, talking about him is an episode in and of itself.
Sure.
Essentially, I did this to just sort of suggest how we can better understand the myths.
Mhm.
And this research has, it's small, right? It's not super popular in the field, but there are some acknowledgments that I would like to put out there, right? So if you're interested in this stuff, you can definitely read any of the writings by the people that I have on this slide here. So starting
Mhm.
with Finnur Magnusson, who I believe it was in the 18th century, had suggested that the locations that Odin is listing in Grimnismal sort of acts as a Norse zodiac. And Einar Paulsson in the early 20th century sort of went along with this. And I'm not going to go into their suggestions because it would take quite a lot of time. But if you're interested in seeing what they have to say, you can read those. And Johnny Langer, who you see later on in the list, has actually talked about what he has to say about Grimnismal and a Norse zodiac. But really, I think a touchstone into this research is this book right here, which I have on my shelf, by Björn Jonsson, which was published in 1989. This is called Stjarnvise i Edom, which he then republished in English in 1994, and he named it Star Myths of the Vikings.
Oh, wow.
Ooh.
And
I need to get me that book.
yeah, well, what he did is he essentially took astronomical research and sort of tried to tie in elements of Norse myth with celestial events that occurred before or during the Viking Age, right? So, for example, like this particular story may suggest that this planet was in this constellation at the same time as this planet, ergo
Oh,
this,
wow.
this story, right? And where I sort of start tying myself into it is so my thesis advisor, Gisli Sigurdsson, wrote an article back in 2022 here in Iceland, and he's a research professor here at the Árni Magnússon Institute. And at the time, I was taking a class that he was teaching on oral traditions and orality in the sagas. And I read his article, How Gylfi's Illusion Breathes Life into the Sky. And essentially, what he suggests, and the overall point that I think he's making in there is that Snorri is pointing us to the sky in Gylfaginning, even when he's not directly saying so. So, of course, the common rebuttal for this, for the conjecture that Gylfaginning suggests that we look at the sky is, well, why doesn't he just say so?
Mm-hmm.
Well, but if it's an inferred knowledge that you would have known at the time when this was made, then you wouldn't need to say it in plain speech.
That is absolutely a good point.
Yeah.
And that is a point that I would make, especially for the people that are holding. You have to ask who is holding this knowledge, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what are they doing with it? And then someone else who's been integral into my research is Christian Etheridge, who's a scholar that worked. He's sort of recompiled some of the elements in an old Icelandic manuscript that's titled GKS 1812 Quarto, and you'll hear me reference that a ton because it is a manuscript that dates between the 13th and 15th centuries. It's sort of a compilation of different sections written in different scribal hands, and it contains a whole bunch of stuff that we'll get to here in a bit.
Ooh.
What a title.
Yeah. Yeah.
You could have made that a little bit more engaging.
Yeah, well, they do have like their own little Icelandic titles, but I think
Okay.
putting the manuscript marker also allows you to look it up. If you'd ever like to read any of these, online, you can go to handrit.is, handrit.is, and you can type in those shelf markers and you can see the prints of the manuscripts and flip through them.
Oh,
wow, that is freaking
Mm-hmm.
boss.
Yeah.
I love that.
So
Wonderful.
the main question for this area of research is why are we even talking about the stars and what would the stars be used for? Well, throughout um, civilization, they've been used in a variety of contexts, telling time, right? Navigation, knowing when to hunt or fish certain creatures, sowing and harvesting crops, and even encoding certain social observances or lessons, right? And oftentimes, this type of knowledge is maintained by a select group of individuals. Um, so, a mentor of mine, Dwayne Hamacher, is a cultural astronomer at the University of Melbourne in Australia. And he has done a ton of research with the Aboriginal peoples in Australia, particularly the Torres Strait region, which is in the northeast. Um, and his book, The First Astronomers, which he published in 2023, shows just how precise and complex the astronomical knowledge of the Aboriginal peoples truly is. And with that stuff in mind, it really helped me frame a uh, a hypothesis of how we could potentially read the Norse myths. And I'd like to demonstrate that to you all by
Ooh,
telling you
Hmm.
an Aboriginal myth really quickly.
fun.
Yeah, please
Okay.
do.
All right. I'm like scooching to get ready
Yeah.
for this. Oh, let's go.
So this story is called The Humiliation of Niruna. Now, this comes from the Kakatha country of the Great Victoria Desert and sort of central southern Australia. And it talks about a hunter named Niruna, who wears this feathered headdress and has a string belt and a whitened tassel on his belt, and he wields a club, and then he covers his body in red ochre. And this picture right here, I got from the Kakatha People's website, and you can see some of that red ochre, I believe, on that's applied to their bodies.
Hmm.
And so this hunter is pursuing these sisters, and these sisters are called the Ugarillia sisters, and they're afraid of him, but he continues to pursue, and they keep avoiding him and sort of thwarting his trickery, right? He's trying to get them, but they won't have it. And their sister, their big sister, Kambugada, she stands up for them and protects them. And she taunts Niruna by placing a row of dingo puppies out in between them. So you have Niruna and then a row of dingo puppies, and then Kambugada and her sisters. And the sisters are behind Kambugada.
Oh, I'd just be playing with the puppies.
Yeah.
I would not care about anything else
Yeah.
anymore. I'd just be
Mhm.
like, puppies, come on.
Yeah, well, the thing is that it taunts him, right? Because like instead of a bunch of fully grown, right, dingoes, these are just little puppies, and not only that, she begins to chant and produce this fire magic, or excuse me, he begins to chant and produce fire magic in his right hand because he's furious at this point. So he's wielding his club and he's producing this fire magic. And the sisters become terrified. And the myth says that because they're part of this Mingari totem, that they transform themselves into thorny devil lizards that sort of like hide their heads in the sand. And to stand up for them, Kambugada, the big sister, starts producing fire magic in her left foot and advances toward Niruna. And Niruna, being the coward that he is, becomes frightened, and his fire magic begins to dissipate. But later on, his desire comes back, and his pride, and so his fire magic comes back. And because Kambugada can't regenerate this fire magic quickly, she calls on Baba, who's the fire dingo, who then shakes Niruna from east to west, and then eventually her fire magic does come back, and she thwarts Niruna again, and his dissipates. Now, we could spend a ton of time talking about the social implications of this myth. And of course, there are many social observances that we can make from this myth here. But what I'm trying to illustrate is that if we if we just simply look at the myth for what it is, right? If we had it written down, we may draw all sorts of assumptions about what it could mean. But if we look at the context in which the myth is told, we find out very quickly what it means. And I don't know if I need to move, at least in on my PC, I
Oh,
have to move
wow.
the toolbar. Yeah, so we find out very quickly what it means. This is a myth that is clearly visible in the night sky. Now, this is in the southern hemisphere, so everything is sort of inversed, right? But Niruna is represented by the constellation what we would associate as Orion, and the asterisms, meaning the parts of the constellation therein, so his belt, the feet, and things like that. Kumbhagada, the big sister, is represented by the Hyades, which is found in Taurus. And the fire club of Niruna is Betelgeuse or Betelgeuse, however you want to say it, the red star in the hand of Orion. And then her fire magic is Aldebaran, the red star inside of the Pleiades. The dingo puppies are the asterism of what we would know as the bow or maybe the shield of Orion. And then Orion being shaken east to west is, of course, how Orion moves throughout the night.
That is cool. Because I was about to ask, like, when you said that he was shook from east to west, I was about to say, is this a daily occurrence?
Yeah.
Because it sounded very like
Yes.
rhythmic.
And what's great is that you just said daily occurrence and rhythmic, right? Because those are the types of things that occur inside of the verbiage that Snorri uses in the Edda. For example,
Ooh. And that was
Thor,
totally intentional for my part. I just wanted to totally
right?
intend to do that. Yeah, planned.
So, spoiler alert, right? Thor wades through rivers every day, right? So then this is something that we can see daily.
hmm
And as Dan alluded to earlier, this happens in so many mythologies around the world. And many of us are familiar, of course, with Greco-Roman myths. And what I'd mentioned earlier is that Orion and Scorpio, okay, so Orion is this great hunter, Scorpion's sent to kill him, he dies, Zeus makes him into a constellation. And if you look at the night sky, they're not in the sky at the same time, right? When Orion's up, Scorpio's down, and when Scorpio's up, Orion's down. And so this celestial movement mimics their relationship as being arch rivals, right?
I have the biggest smile on my face right
Yeah,
now.
I can tell. It's so fun.
These are the least I've said in so long.
And then, of course, we have, like, for example, sometimes people become stars. So Hadrian had a lover named Antinous, and when Antinous died, he had him deified and created into a constellation. So there is, if you look at the constellation of Aquila and many of the Almagest depictions, you will see the asterisms below Aquila forming the shape of Hadrian's lover Antinous. And this happens in the Norse myths, right? Thjassi's eyes, Orvindil's toe,
Of course.
right?
Why did I think of that?
Yeah. We have references in Norse myth of beings, Thor, the gods, creating constellations or known stars out of bits and pieces of other beings, right?
Do when it comes to full-blown stories about that kind of link with the sky and obviously the different constellations, do we know how they're created? Is it even possible to know? Is it a case of they look up and see the shapes and then create the story to suit? Or does the story come first and then it's like we're gonna kind of make it fit what's up there? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it absolutely does. I think it's an age-old question. I think it sort of works both ways. For example, in the example of Antinous, right? It could be that the Romans saw something below Aquila that, they had always looked at like, what could that be? And then eventually Hadrian was like, well, that's going to be Antinous now. But what seems more likely is that, and this goes into memory studies, and Dwayne touches on it a lot, I think, in his book, the First Astronomers. But what seems to be the case is that a lot of times it is a celestial observance, which then is codified as myth, right? They are looking up and they are noticing something, sometimes things that happen at a certain time of the year, right? Like these particular stars forming this particular shape come at this time of the year. So like, let's say that there's this spider looking shape, and every year, right when we need to plant this specific crop that we grow for our survival, it is on the horizon right after sunset. Then we begin to associate, okay, that spider brings our crops, right? Something like that.
Hmm.
That seems to be how this stuff sort of
Okay, so then you would create a story.
to
I guess so.
memorize it.
Yeah, and it gets passed on through generations, and they know that that spider is crop planting time.
And
I also,
yeah, go ahead. Go
no,
ahead.
I was just gonna say that like it makes sense to me from what I know from memory studies and oral knowledge, like how that just because it's okay, a little caveat to begin with, but like we live in we live in a society that is very different from all of this, right? So we're so like this is a type of knowledge production and knowledge preservation that is so kind of far fetched compared to what we are used to dealing with. But it makes sense to me based on my what I've worked with and know from memory studies and oral linguistics that a myth like the one that you told us about the dingo pups and everything, that new observations would spark the interest to figure out, but why then would why would her fire magic go away? Oh, because it takes time for it to regenerate. And like that it would not necessarily that someone would sit down and go, okay, so now we're going to make up a story, but that it would evolve kind of as an explanation for why the sky is changing.
Yes. Absolutely. And you reminded me of something I really needed to touch on. And the point of this, so as you say, right, this is from a tradition that is this is from people who live in a society where what we would call an oral traditional society, right, where things are not written down, they're passing it down word of mouth. And of course, and I'm going to steal Dwayne's words from his lecture, but we always talk about the game of telephone, right? And we always know that when we play the game of telephone, someone inevitably messes it up. And
Hmm.
what we say at the beginning is not what they hear at the end.
Yeah.
But in oral traditional societies, where you're passing down potentially codified information that deals with when you should plant crops, right? Or something like that, it ensures the survival of your people, of your society. And it's something that you're really stressing not to get wrong. Right?
Oh,
And then,
I
you
get
know,
it wrong, and it'd be like the end of everybody. I just, oh no.
well, that's why a lot of times there is an elder, like in the Aboriginal societies, there is an elder who is overseeing this knowledge, right? And it gets passed down to someone who is being seen as worthy of carrying this knowledge. And going to Mag's point, right, of hey, we're seeing this, the fire magic, that is clearly what they saw in the sky. So Aldebaran and Betelgeuse or Betelgeuse, they're both variable red stars, meaning that their intensity fluctuates, but it doesn't just happen overnight. It happens over hundreds of days. And what the Aboriginals noticed is that the cycle of them would be off. As one is brightening, the other one is dimming. And this takes long-term systematic observance of celestial phenomena. And they discovered this before Western science had even realized that Aldebaran and Betelgeuse were variable stars.
Wow.
I'm not
Yeah.
even surprised at this point.
No.
So now we can talk about Norse stuff.
Ooh,
Okay.
And that here's I'll just give a little shout out to the thesis. So in case anyone wants to read it, it's available on skimmin.is, where we keep all of our dissertations and master's theses and things like that. Or you can see it on academia.edu where I've uploaded it. And a quick caveat that there have been things that I've updated since this, right? Because the research is
cool.
ongoing. Yeah, the research is ongoing, right? So you find out more and more, and that's the point of it.
Hmm.
Absolutely.
Um, so here's what I found. You asked earlier about celestial observances. This is a snippet from the thesis where you can see that I went through the transcription of the Codex Regius manuscript of the Prose Edda. So GKS 2367 quarto. And this is Anthony Fox's normalization of it in Icelandic, in the Old Icelandic, and then I also used his English translation as well. But I went line by line and page by page. So, for example, like this, Heman right here, you see 837. So this is page 8, line 37.
Can I just say major props for the thoroughness?
Yeah,
Jeez,
well, it's
wow. Like I know that of course, yeah, this is how research is done, and I am, familiar with it myself, but still deserves to be pointed out. Wow.
Hmm.
thank
I
you.
agree.
No, it's because like in this book, Björn he had mentioned something like there's 80 something celestial references, and I thought it was time for a recount. And yeah, and so what I got, I mean, to his credit, there are a ton. Gylfaginning comprises about, if you get just like a translation of Snorri's Edda, Gylfaginning, where we find most of the narrative prose of Norse myth, is about 50 pages. And so 94 celestial references in 50 pages is pretty intense.
So that's a bit less than like almost two per page if you were to split them evenly.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
That's a lot.
Absolutely.
That's quite. I don't know how frequent they are, but they seem fairly frequent. Just skimming over like your notations here, that they appear pretty much throughout the whole thing.
Yes. Yes,
Hmm.
they do. They're obviously the cosmological creation is toward the beginning, so they get a little
Sure.
bit heavy there. But like I'll show in a bit, even during some of the stories that we're familiar with, they make an appearance, and that's what changes everything.
Were there any missing between the Icelandic and the English translation?
I
Ooh.
did not notice. I may have made a comment in the in the thesis. I did notice that, and this is something that I'll get to when we talk about um, Thor, and of course when he fights the Midgard serpent. It seems to me, and this is just off the what I can recollect off the top of my head, because you always have to kind of like save face a little bit, right?
Sure, 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 sure,
Mhm.
sure.
Yeah, but
Absolutely. Yeah, go ahead.
from what it seems is that sometimes, of course, things because and this is the point of this section, right? This section of the presentation, because we are seeing the myths written in a narrative context, we are analyzing them in a literary context. And so we are translating them in a literary context. So we're looking for a meaning that we are thinking that it's conveying. So, for example, one of the most famous ones is after Thor is poisoned when he's fighting Jormungandr. It says in many translations that he falls back 9 feet, right? He steps back 9 feet and then he falls dead. And that's something that obviously we can associate. If I'm writing a story, you have this god staggering backwards and then falling. But from what I can tell in the Old Icelandic, it seems that it just says that he takes 9 feet. He takes 9 paces. And so that could also be in the other direction, forward. And I think that that is the
Hmm.
direction that it should go. And I will show you why.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, so I have these little notes page sporadically so that they could act as like stopping points and like maybe just clarify things. But just going over, like, stars act as a memory tool, and they are integrated into mythologies around the world. We've already mentioned that Gylfaginning itself has 94 direct celestial references. And then one that stands out to me and that I think Gisli used in his article and that he's talked to me about is when Gangleri makes this quote or says this quote inside of Gylfaginning, he turns to one of the kings and he says, "You are able to give a great deal of information about the heavens. What other chief centers are there besides the one at Weird's Well?" And at first, you can just gloss over this. But if you really think about what he's saying, what he's doing is he's associating the gods and their places with the heavens, right? He's saying
Yeah.
that all of these places that we're talking about are right there.
Yeah, because that made me. I did a little academic double take there when I read that because I was like, okay, so you're referencing the heavens besides the one at Weird's Well. Wait, hang on. That means that the Weird's Well is in the wait, what?
Exactly. Exactly.
Interesting.
Mhm.
So I call the skalds, right, the keepers of the stars. And if you want to know anything more about Snorri, if there's so much research out there, snorrastova.is. There's a great research institute here in Iceland that is they have like a museum and research institute dedicated to Snorri and his life and the compound where he lived and things like that. So if you'd like to find out more information, you can check that out. But really, what I have to get into is showing what frame of reference could someone from the Middle Ages, early on and through the later Middle Ages, have of the cosmos.
Mhm.
Because that's an important piece of, like, okay, well, if it is in the heavens, not only we have to answer where do we look, but how? How do we look?
Mm,
Because as you've
mm,
mentioned, we're in today's mindset, and how we look at the sky and how we draw certain constellations is different than how it was, right?
Okay.
So starting in the fourth century BC, there's this guy named Aristotle, and he sort of, he's showing that he believes that the universe is Earth centered. And this isn't just probably unique to Aristotle. I'm giving very vague generalizations here. But I'm showing too that this information is found in 14th century Icelandic manuscripts. So you see this depiction of the Aristotelian model of cosmology found in AM 415 Quarto. And I give you the little page number right there and the year of the manuscript. And what it shows is an Earth-centered universe. And what Aristotle suggested is that the visible celestial bodies, including the five visible planets and then the sun and the moon, comprising of seven, each inhabited their own sphere outside of the Earth. So the Earth is stationary, sitting here, and then the sun and the moon are all moving in their own spheres, turning around the Earth. And in the far outermost sphere, we have the sphere of fixed stars. And fixed, not meaning that the stars don't move, because they do, but that they're fixed onto this sphere as if we're inside of imagine if we're inside of a globe and the stars are imprinted into the inside of it. And
Mhm.
that globe is moving around, right?
Okay.
And then you can compare that with the Earth-centered focal point of Snorri's Edda, right? This same sort of understanding of the cosmos is being depicted inside of Snorri's own words. And then we look at other medieval Icelandic manuscripts, most famously GKS 1812 Quarto. And inside of it, there's a ton of astronomical knowledge. There's Aldatal, which is attributed to Star Adi, who is a predecessor of Snorri's, and he was known for sort of keeping track of the sun and its altitude at noon and bearing at sunset and sunrise. So there's a section that is attributed to his work. There are glosses of star names in Latin, Arabic, and even Old Norse.
Oh.
Um, and this is where we get a very famous Old Norse constellation name called the Ulfskepter, the wolf's jaw.
Hmm. Hmm.
And we get one as well that I'll have to talk about another time because I didn't put it in here, which is Astar Bardagi, the Gods Battle.
Hmm.
And we get another
Interesting.
one. Yeah, we get another one that I am going to talk about because it's very, very important, at least in my own research, and that is Fiskikarl, the fisherman.
See, Thor. Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And it tells you right where to look to see that myth too, I believe. Um, the what's key to note is that as far as stars and how constellations were drawn, that there wasn't really a standard until we'll get to that um, the 1920s. But what I do want to show as well is that there were depictions of constellations inside of this man. There's depictions of constellations inside of this manuscript that Christian Etheridge has tied to what is called an arateia or aratea, depending upon where I guess the stress is. But what these were medieval illustrations of an ancient Greek poem in which the poet Aratus put the gods, the Greek gods, into the sky and then told what stars comprise of that particular being from the mythology. And part of that includes these depictions of Greco-Roman constellations, and these are from the manuscript right there. So there is clear knowledge of these Greco-Roman constellations by the medieval Icelanders at least, and I would argue all throughout Europe because the Greek Almagest, which was essentially created by Ptolemy in the second century, was the most influential of all star charts. And it included 1,022 star names and the coordinates of where to find these stars, but it wasn't necessarily drawn out. So sometimes you'll have different depictions of the same constellation. And you can find a lot of depictions if you look at the Al-Sufi manuscripts, where in the 10th century, an astronomer compiled what Ptolemy had said in his Almagest, and he corrected some of the magnitudes and some of the shifting, the minor shifting of the stars, and then he drew them out and drew what the bodies would look like. And so this right here shows Auriga, the charioteer, and I'll show you what it looks like in the modern because in the 1920s, the IAU took these constellations and sort of simplified them, which is great for us, but I think makes it very problematic if we're trying to look into the past and how people may have looked at constellations.
Hmm. I wanted to ask quickly when you said that they obviously knew of this in Iceland and the Greco-Roman constellations. Would they have referred to them using the Greek gods, or would they have modernized it and kind of put it into their own kind of world, I guess, and their own pantheon?
No, no, that's a good question. No, in the manuscript, and I was reading it today because I was looking for something, and it is an absolute. It
Mess?
it is hard to read.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
I was
Um,
like, is it just like a little bit not necessarily all over the place, but just a lot of info dumping without necessarily a lot of explanation for what's happening, where and why.
Absolutely, and also you can see the quality of the pages. I mean,
Mm.
this is a great page, right? These are great pages,
Yeah.
sort of
Okay.
what it's saying. But as you notice, like for example, it's using the Greco-Roman name. So here, you know, we have Capricorn, right? So it's using the Greco-Roman names. It's not putting it in any sort of Norse context, but except for a specific one where it mentions the wolf's jaw being the Hyades asterism. Remember Kumbugata that we talked about earlier, the
Yep.
big sister with her foot? So that would be the wolf's jaw. And the Fiskikarlar, it calls the belt of Orion.
Okay.
Ah,
Yes. And
interesting.
So looking at what these depictions would look at. So for my thesis and for the research that I do, I utilize stellarium. So Dwayne Hamacher, once again, the astronomer at the University of Melbourne, suggested to me prior to me doing this thesis that I utilize stellarium and what settings to put it on.
What is stellarium?
Stellarium is an astronomical software that you can download to your computer, and you can essentially it has a lot of for lack of better terms, a lot of gee whiz technology that's
Nice.
inside it, right?
Okay, nice.
Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
scholarly term right
Mhm.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A bunch of gee whiz technology. No, but there's a ton of research goes into it, and astronomers have put in star systems from a variety of different cultures. And what's so amazing about the software is that you can rewind time and you can
Oh,
see,
wow.
oh yeah, you can see what meteor showers were going like during that time, right? There's a ton of stuff that you can
Does
do.
it also have like geographical locations? So I mean, like if you're, let's see, rewinding time till I don't know how far back it goes,
Yes.
but like if you're rewinding to say the 10th century AD, could you then change depending on whether you're in what we today refer to as Australia or Scandinavia? Like
Yes. And that's what I did for my
what?
thesis. That's what I did for my
That's
thesis.
amazing.
Is I went to the year 1223 when this Edda was compiled, and I went to Iceland and I looked exactly where I believe that Snorri is telling us to look. And you will see exactly what is there.
Aren't humans insane?
I'm
How
freaking out.
how do you even create something like that? Sarah in the chat said that she had it on her phone.
Yeah. Yeah. It works great on the phone, by the way. It works great.
Is it, if it's on the phone, can you like hold it up to the sky and kind of point it, and
Yeah,
it'll
yeah, you
tell you
can.
things?
You can do that, but a lot of times I'm living in the past, man. I'm not even looking at real time. I have it rewound. I'm on the bus, rewound to, 12:22 trying to figure out
That's
where the door is, you know what I
that's
mean?
so.
Sounds familiar. Sounds very familiar.
Just the thought of you riding the bus, but really you're in
No.
the 11th, 13th century,
Oh yeah.
just looking at the stars, looking at the night sky. That's
Oh yeah.
would it be possible to? I'm sure it would be to kind of like project that into, like a what are they called? The big dome things that you sit in and look up.
They are called stellariums.
Oh,
I
okay.
believe so. And I think that's, of course, where the app got its name. But there are, I mean, I've never been inside of a stellarium, but absolutely. I mean, I think that would be that would be the
It's fun.
next level way of verifying that, besides just going outside and seeing it, which
Mm-hmm.
is sometimes difficult, admittedly, in a city. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but these,
Wow.
if you
Okay,
look,
cool.
the
Yeah.
Hashtag not sponsored.
yeah. The constellations that are at the top, these are the ones depicted in stellarium. So the far left shows Auriga, the charioteer constellation in the modern depiction, right? And then in the center, you have the Arabic Al-Sufi depiction. And then on the far right, you have the Greco-Roman depiction. And of course, you see that the middle and right ones are more humanoid than the one on the far left, which becomes, I think, a potential sticking point when looking at some mythological interpretations, like for Thor's feats in Utgard, which I've done.
Okay, cool. Just for a complete astronomy dweeb or noob like me who's not really kind of a part of this club yet, just for frame of reference, that the biggest kind of visible star in all of these three constellations, labeled respectively Capella, R3, and Goat, is that the same one? Is that the same
Yes.
star? Yeah, okay,
Yes.
cool. That's what I was
Okay.
wondering.
Yeah. I'm
Yeah.
glad you asked that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
No,
so we're
no.
looking at the exact same place in space, but the lines are just drawn differently.
Absolutely.
Have the other stars moved? So the one that's Capella, you have the one that's kind of up to the northwest.
No, what it's doing is it's connecting different stars. So in the
Right. Okay.
1920s, right, the IAU sort of has said, hey, this is the general area that Auriga is, and this is how we're going to mark the constellation. Whereas in the past, you had guys like Al-Sufi who were taking Ptolemy star charts, which is just a list of 1022, star names and their coordinates, and going, okay, where is this? All right, it's here. And then the next one he lists is here, so I'm going to draw a line there. And then the next one is here, and I'm going to draw a line there. And that's what they've done in Stellarium, which is why you get so much more of a humanoid figure than you do than the modern depiction.
Okay, cool.
Okay. So the modern one is the one on the left.
Exactly.
Okay, with you.
Yeah. Now, this is where it starts getting pretty neat, at least in my mind, is that the later manuscripts show a direct association with Edic materials and the sky, in that they are often compiled together. Okay, so for example, one of my favorite is Melchizedek's Edda from the 18th century, and its title is Psalm 66, right? So you can go to hundred.is and type it in, and you can look at these 8 leaves of, there's a ton of information in it, but there's 8 leaves that have depictions of the gods. And Giesli, in the book Manuscripts of Iceland from 2004, gives a great quote in what this could mean, that we have this Edic material compiled with information about celestial bodies and astronomy and astrology. And he says, Melchizedek's Edda is therefore a remarkable testimony to the fact that in the 18th century, the ancient understanding of the link between myths and the heavens was still alive, and the Edda did not serve solely as a fountain of poetic diction. And what I have found is that even some of the images in this manuscript, particularly the one of Thor, gives what I think to be a clear astronomical reference of where he is in the night sky.
Okay.
And before we start that, we'll just a quick recap. So to people during the early Middle Ages, essentially since the 4th century BC, the Earth is at the center of the universe. And the visible planets, the 5 visible planets, and then the sun and the moon, and then the fixed stars are all moving in their own spheres around the Earth. We have compilations of astronomical knowledge found in medieval Iceland that includes Arabic, Greek, and even Norse star names. And we know that the modern depictions don't always necessarily reflect some of the depictions that we get in earlier astronomical drawings of these constellations. And we know that there is a clear association, even up to the 18th century, of Edic materials and the heavens. So before I go forward, is there anything that you all would like to gloss over?
I'm just having fun. Just please continue.
Yeah, I'm just blown away by how thorough all of this is. I'm loving it.
So to establish the timeline that I looked at for the thesis, by the way, I don't know, can you see the videos that I have pulled, like the little toolbar of videos and stuff? Is that also on the screen as I'm sharing my screen?
No, it's just the slide.
Perfect. Okay, good. So establishing the timeline for the thesis, I set the software to 1223, right? And to figure out what time of the year I was going to look in, it wasn't too hard necessarily in Scandinavia, because we know that in the upper northern hemisphere, it's, looking for stars in the summertime is just not going to happen, right? It's very,
Oh, what you're talking about?
yeah, it's very difficult. And so it hinted to me, of course, it needs to be in the latter half of the year. But one line that I always found very intriguing to me, and that when I started doing this research, I thought alluded to me to know when to start looking, was the line in Völuspá where it says Sol varp sunnan, the sun comes from the south. And that's a very strange thing to say, right? Because we think of the sun as rising in the east and setting in the west.
Yeah.
But in the northern hemisphere, where we live, and where Snorri lived and his predecessors and the ancient Germanics, and Scandinavians, the sun rises in the southeast and sets in the southwest during the winter. So
Of course it does.
this told
Hmm.
me to look during the winter time. And so I set the timeline for the deepest part of winter, the winter solstice of 1223. And that's when I started looking at the sky. And for frame of reference, this night sky between the year 900 and 1223, if you're looking at the earliest, Edict poems that we have, if you go back to the 9th, 10th century, the change is pretty negligible. There's really not much. It would make a difference if you're looking at, okay, well, was there a particular comet that was visible or whatever? But as far as
Okay.
where is this constellation in the sky, it's going to be in essentially the same location. Matter of
Okay.
fact, what I have calculated, and I could be completely wrong, but what I have calculated is that from my research, if I wanted to look at the exact same constellation in the exact same place that Snorri may have seen it in 1223, I would have to wait 3 hours more. They've shifted about that much.
Oh,
That's what
okay.
I've calculated.
So
Okay.
huge difference.
Yeah,
And,
it's not, yeah.
and you know what, Ryan? The thoroughness of this PowerPoint, I'm gonna say your calculation is probably correct. I'd believe you. You could tell me anything right now, and I would believe you.
Well, yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, no, I really have done my best to try to be as thorough as possible, and I'm super excited to just keep going. So please feel free to stop me if you're like,
Oh,
what are you talking about? Because you know,
we're just
um,
sat here, jaws open, just
yeah,
loving
I'm
every second of
excited to
it.
get to Thor.
oh yeah,
Hmm.
here we're about to start. So this
Mhm.
just sort of shows, the sun coming from the south, and what I have here is, and I don't even have to give photo credit because he did himself down in the bottom left. But I've taken this photo, and what this shows is from the same vantage point in this field, we can see how the sun moves throughout the year. So if you look at the sun setting on the far left of the picture, that's in the southwest region of the sky during the winter solstice. The one in the middle would be during the equinox, and that right there is due west. And then the one on the right is during the summer solstice when it's in the northwest. And so
Huh.
yes. So if you are right in a culture and you're not writing anything down and you have this frame of reference, you can say, hey, I know what time of year it is. Or I know, oh, hey, the sun has reached that mountaintop. We have now reached the longest day or the shortest day of the year. Now it's going to start getting colder as it moves its way back south, right? So
we're
you can
we're
sort of,
so disconnected from like nature now, aren't we? Because we
oh yeah,
just it's so easy just to look at my watch. I know exactly what time it is. This is so
I don't know if we're
fascinating.
disconnected from nature because we still have to deal with it. But what I think we have is that we are becoming we're not as literate in reading what our surroundings is telling us
oh for
as they
sure,
were back in the day. It's
Mm,
like it's a written language that we've forgotten.
yeah,
absolutely.
it is sad that it's lost. I'd love to know
But I think it
this
depends
stuff.
on where you live too, because I have friends from the north here in Norway, and like I'll say something offhand about like weather patterns or like the sun, like something like this that you've shown us now, Ryan, and they'll just look at me and go, "Don't you know this or that and this?" Like obviously you would know this because they're used to dealing with midnight suns and lightless winters, and because they have a way different experience of all that. So I
Yeah,
also think you're a bit at kind of dependent on where you live.
Hmm.
absolutely. And that's a great point because then those um like for example, Dwayne has talked about how certain Aboriginal peoples moved throughout Australia and the skyscape changed, so did the mythological elements in their
Yeah.
story, right? Because it began to reflect a new skyscape. And so with this frame of reference, we're going to start in the year 1223 with the sun setting in the Southwest. And I want you to imagine that and how I have it framed in this thesis. And my buddy, shout out to my buddy Ed, who thought that my thesis should be called Snorri Sturluson and the Hot Tub Time Machine. It didn't make the cut, but I did put him in the acknowledgments in the thesis, and I put that title. But the idea, and this is, of course, stemming from something that Gisli had talked about, is that, we can look from maybe the vantage point that maybe Snorri would have had, or even people before him. It doesn't necessarily have to be Snorri. So for those listening, it doesn't have to be directly even in Iceland, because I'm going to show you how the sky looks in other parts of Scandinavia as well.
I was just about to ask that. How different would it be in Norway, Sweden, Denmark, England?
Not too bad. Not too bad. So we're going to see that it's pretty consistent, but just for the sake of having a narrative by which, to tell this story, we're just going to start right here, and we're going to look due south as the sun is setting in the southwest. And I'm going to talk to you about the creation of the Norse cosmos. So
Kim just said in the chat that we have to call the episode Snorri Sturluson and his hot tub time machine. Can we steal that from you? Can we borrow
absolutely. And if my buddy Ed is watching, then that's definitely, that's it. Snorri Sturluson and the hot tub time machine.
Big shout out to Ed and Ryan for that title.
Ed, yeah. So the sun is in the southwest, and what we're told, right, is that, and without going into the exact verbiage, but we're told that Muspelheim is in this southern region, right, and that the sparks of Muspelheim mix with the sort of poisonous rivers that are coming out of Niflheim, and that when they begin to mix, rime ice begins to form over Ginnungagap. Okay. Now, in the third part of Snorri's Edda, called Skaldskaparmál, he has a ton of lists of poetic diction. Hey, if you want to say this in a different way, you can call it this, 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 or that. And what he says is, if you want to reference the sky, you can call it Ginnungagap. And so I took it literally. I said, okay, well, Snorri says that the sky can be Ginnungagap, so then that's what it's going to be. So we have the southern region where we can actually see right now the sparks of Muspelheim. And then we have the northern region where we can see the cool sky. And we're going to watch this mix as ice begins to form across Ginnungagap.
No way. I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt, but keep going, please.
Right? So I'm seeing this, as Snorri is saying this, I'm seeing this as a very astronomical interpretation, through an astronomical lens. I'm seeing the sparks from the south region of the sky where the sun is setting, mixing with the coldness that's coming. And that rime ice, I'm associating simply with the stars forming. Mm-hmm. And it'll have to be another episode. I'm not inviting myself back, but it's like inviting yourself over, but it's
trust me. I think both Dan and I are fairly certain, without even having talked about it. It's just our telepathic link going, we need this guy back on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you can talk about, Audhumla and the first man appearing in 3 days with this exact rising right here. But I'm not going to go into that now. What I'm going to go into is if we waited a little bit longer, we would eventually see this. In the dead of night, with no light pollution, we would see Yggdrasil sprout and cover the night sky. And this is not something from me. I will give credit where credit's due. It goes back to Björn Jonsson and his book, Star Myths of the Vikings, but where he talks about the ash tree Yggdrasil being the Milky Way. And it makes great sense. Here I have the actual Old Icelandic and then the English translations. Once again, this is from the Codex Regius version. And it says its branches spread out over all the world and extend across the sky. And it is also said that the Norns dwell by the well, and they take water out of it each day. And with the mud that lies around it, they put it on the ash so that it doesn't decay. And the water's holy. And anything that goes into the well is as white becomes as white as the membranes that's inside of an eggshell. And so what we see here is we see the whitewashed walls of the tree, right? If we were to look at the Milky Way, we would see the white sides of the Milky Way that could then in turn be the mud that has been splashed onto Yggdrasil.
My brain is exploding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't really know what to say.
Yeah, same, Dan, same. Just
Well,
the
the great-
branches then extending across the world.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And if you do read in my thesis, because that could be in a whole hour by itself, but there's a part where I talk about what the three roots are, because it's very interesting because the third root is said to be both below the earth but also in heaven. So then that's something that I talk about what that could mean, and I propose that what it is it's three different ways of looking at the Milky Way, looking at it east to west by south, east to west by north, et cetera, and seeing the different stars that are behind that landscape. But so if we take that as Yggdrasil, right? The first thing that we come to in one of the first things that we come to in Gylfaginning is, well, this king called Gylfi, and he goes to meet the Aesir. And I've taken three excerpts here from Anthony Fox's English translation. So these are sort of just, they're taken out, but they're in this order. So he got to the city where he saw a high hall so that he could scarcely see over it. And its roof was covered with gilded shields like tiles.
Mhm.
And in the doorway of the hall, Gylfi saw a man juggling with knives, keeping 7 in the air at a time. Very peculiar that he gives an exact number and that all 7 are in the air. And then he saw 3 thrones, one above the other, and there were 3 men, one sitting in each.
I can't wait for this next slide.
Same. I'm like, where's this going?
I was like, oh, go on then.
So one thing that you will notice in sort of mythological astronomies, if you will, around the world is that oftentimes celestial elements can take on multiple different roles based on the story that they're in, right? Similar to an actor having multiple different roles. Just because Bruce Willis is in this movie doesn't mean he's the same guy from the last movie, right?
Is that how acting works?
Yeah, so
Okay.
that's exactly how I see this, right? Is that the Milky Way, just because it's Yggdrasil, does not mean that it's not also the roof of Valhalla. And I will say Valhalla for the scholars out there listening, just because it's the normalized English version, and that's what I'm doing. So this is what I consider to be the arc. If you were to lay on your back outside at night in the deep winter, you would look up and, like the poem that Snorri uses to justify his claim here from Theodulf of Hvinir, you would be bombarded with Odin's hall shingles. You would see these shields above you that are thatching the roof of the heavens. And what's interesting is that at this point of the night, the Milky Way is as high as it's going to get. The arch is as high as it's going to get. It's this high hall, and it's due east and west. And so I began to look for the entrance. I'm looking for now the entrance of the hall, and I'm looking for someone juggling 7 knives. And if you look at, I'm going to draw real quick.
Ooh.
Yeah, if you look at this end of the hall, not just because it's E for east, right? But if you look at this end of the hall, you see a very famous humanoid figure.
Okay, yeah.
And right over here, and I will zoom in on this. I don't know why it's doing that, but right over here.
Looks very metal.
Yeah, you will see 7 stars. Hang on, let me just erase this.
I thought you just drew 2 little ears on there.
So kitty cat.
Yeah, so I embarrassingly don't really know what the Milky Way looks like because I never really get to look up. So when you're looking for the Milky Way, is it that it makes sense now, but like that milkiness,
Oh
that
yeah.
kind of that's what it is. That kind of almost like clouded.
If we go back, this is actually a picture I used in my thesis. This is by Connor McNeil, and he let me use it for the thesis. But you can see this is over Gullfoss, Iceland, and you can
Mm-hmm.
see the Milky Way band sort of going over. Now, obviously, the image is enhanced, and we have,
Sure, sure.
but yeah.
Wow. Okay. So if I was to look up tonight, I don't know if I can see the Milky Way tonight, but let's say I went to like a dark zone, I could see the Milky Way. Is it that kind of that clouding that you can see in this archway here? That's what the Milky Way
Sure.
is.
Sure, and this is a view
I never knew that.
from the southern hemisphere, right? So yes, this is the southern hemisphere, but it is showing how this arc would look if
It's
you're in
almost
an
like a ghostly rainbow. I know
yeah.
it's such a silly thing, but
Well, interesting that you say that it's the rainbow as
I was
well,
thinking Heimdall and Bifrost and everything.
because you already know what else it could act as,
Yeah,
even.
I was like,
oh,
this is linking to like a whole shit ton of stuff.
Yep.
I wish I
The
could have said that I
academic,
thought of
the academic
Yep.
phrase or amount of shit ton.
So
that.
if we look and we see now the Arch of Valhalla here, the roof, this is the Greek Almagest depiction of the constellations. We see a man here at the entrance juggling seven knives, and I'll talk about what these constellations are right here. So we can identify the man by looking at the constellation of Orion, and then
Hmm.
the seven stars that he is juggling, I suggest, is the Pleiades, which is known as the Seven Sisters. They all seven are in the air at the same time, just like the description tells us. And we don't have to go too far to
Wait,
see.
so
Oh, go
did
ahead.
they were they did they knew of the seven sisters or the seven sitters?
The seven, excuse me, no, the Seven Sisters. It's a typo.
Oh, okay.
No, this constellation is one of the most recognizable asterisms across all cultures, and actually,
Okay.
the myth that I told you at the beginning is essentially a variation of what we would consider to be like one of the oldest astronomical myths of mankind, in that Orion is chasing these sisters, the Pleiades, throughout the sky.
Okay. So they would have known of this.
Oh yeah, yeah, they would have at least recognized it in the sky. And actually, I don't want to spoil it, but I have a picture that I took last night where you can
Oh
clearly.
wow.
Oh my God, the light pollution in Oslo has been extremely uh, uh what am I trying to say? I'm using the wrong words. The light pollution has been almost not present for the past week. And I don't know why that is. Every time I walk my dog at night, I look up and I'm like, what?
Yeah,
Stars? What is happening? So I'm so excited to walk Ibsen later tonight.
Yeah. Oh,
yeah.
it's even around by me. I get light pollution, but it's not tons. So on a clear night, I can look up and when it's so mesmerizing. And I wish that I knew more about the night sky because I can just stand there and just look up. And it's almost like looking into a fire. You know that effect you get when you stare into fire, and it's just kind of hypnotizing. It's that
Absolutely.
same thing. I could just stare up and just be like lost.
And I think it ties into the point that even if you don't, even if you think that, let's say, for example, okay, no, there's no way that they knew about Greco-Roman constellations. Like if we try to suggest that maybe these astronomical references are older than Snorri's time, which I believe that they are, and you're like, well, there's no way that they could have known Greco-Roman constellations. Well, you don't necessarily need to.
Well,
The
I don't think the Aborigines did either.
That's exactly the point, right? The asterisms inside of Orion are used throughout so many cultures in the world that had no contact with the ancient Greeks, right? And didn't borrow that from Greek
Hang on, Ryan.
astronomy.
Are you telling me that more people than the ancient Greeks looked up at the night sky and had thoughts about it? Is that what you're telling me right now?
It's a bold claim.
Yeah.
but I am.
But thank you for making it. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to run for a wee. And usually at this point I'd be like type into Mags. Oh, just carry on. I'm just gonna nip off the
Okay,
toilet.
we're gonna do a little pause
But
for Dan and his tiny bladder.
yeah, I'm gonna be like, don't you dare carry on. Please wait for me to come back.
Absolutely.
I'll be back in 2 seconds.
Dude, I am blown away by this, Ryan. This is so much fun.
Well, thank you. No, I appreciate it because I was so inspired by what Geesley had wrote that the fact that I could, because we often, at least in the field of Norse myth, it's always this looming black cloud of it's dead. We can't know anything about it. There's so much that is lost. It's gone. But if you do at least entertain this method of analyzing the myths, it allows them to come back and be renewed, essentially revived.
Yeah, and also this just Dan and I have talked about this a lot, both just amongst ourselves, but also with other guests about the the real case of why you shouldn't be satisfied with something having been studied just once, because other people with from other generations with other uh, kind of types of life experiences will have different ways of looking at this stuff, and then stuff like this happens that you open new ways of looking at things.
Well, I appreciate that. And I think that that should be the overall goal of scholarship, right? Is that, and that it can be a scary thing sometimes because obviously, you don't want to put out information that maybe you could have researched a little bit more thoroughly, and now you realize that, oh, well, that's not exactly correct. Or maybe that research now falls into the wrong hands and is used in the wrong ways, right? Um, but I think that it's important for scholars to sort of push these boundaries so that we're not just
100%.
simply regurgitating, right? But we're sort of innovating.
Absolutely.
Um, and
Okay,
so,
he's back.
I'm
We
back,
can.
I'm back.
yeah, so we don't have to go too far to meet the kings. So he takes us through the entrance, and we see this guy, and he's juggling seven knives at the same time, which I suggest is Orion juggling the Pleiades. And then we have, and some may out there may reference this book, Germanic Mythology by Jacob Grimm, and say, well, no, the Germanic peoples thought that the Pleiades was a hen with her chicks. But as is the case with many star myths, it depends on who's looking at them, right? Snorri and the poets before him are court poets, and they're used to dealing with people inside of a hall, right? And a juggler would be something that you find more in a hall, not chicks and a hen. And also, one thing that I forgot to show is that if we, and I'll show it here in a bit again because I have another picture, but the way that Orion is dressed in GKS 1812 Quarto is a bit like that of a court jester. He has these pointed sort of shoes on him. So it's a fitting image. But he takes us to see the kings, and there they are. Three kings sitting on a throne, one on top of the other. And I suggest that that is the belt of Orion. So it's another way of looking at the asterisms inside of Orion. And actually, what Christian Etheridge shows in his research is that the belt of Orion had at some point been called the Three Kings, associated with Christ and the Nativity, but called the Three Kings nonetheless. And so there we have the three kings, one sitting on top of each other, high, equally as high, and third.
Yeah, the one sitting on top of each other is fascinating.
As soon as you pointed it out, I was like, I mean, that tracks.
Yeah.
There it is.
I feel like we have other myths from other cultures with way vaguer references.
Absolutely. And if you look at what he's saying, if you look at these exact descriptions and you look in the night sky and you try to find these, using these classical constellations, it absolutely, at least for me, it seems to have worked. And so here I show you the Arabic depiction, the Al-Sufi depiction of these same constellations. It's not too different. One of the myths that I've been commenting on a lot on recent posts is this one, Gefjun and the oxen from the north. And here it is in the Icelandic, but we'll go to the English. And what we're told is that Gylfi, a king named Gylfi, gives a woman a plow land in his kingdom, as much as 4 oxen could plow up in a day or night. And she's one of the Aesir, or the Aesir, and her name was Gefjun. And it says that she took 4 oxen from the north, from Giant Land, the sons of her and a certain giant, and put them before the plow. But the plow cut so hard and deep that it uprooted the land, and the oxen drew the land out to the sea to the west and halted in a certain sound. And there Gefjun put the land and gave it a name and called it Sheland or Zeeland. And so what Snorri is giving us here, I suggest, or what the myth is giving us, whether you want to say it's Snorri or not, is that we have a number that we're looking for, right? 4 oxen, a direction from the north. We're given a time period, a day and night, and we're looking for a description of a plow and somebody pushing a plow.
It's a lot of info, actually.
Uh-huh.
And if you look to the north,
I've heard of the plow though. When it comes
Exactly.
to stars, I've heard of that.
Yeah, Dan is like, I know this one.
I know this one. I got one.
and the plow is what is inside of a constellation that we would know as the Ursa Major. And the plow is, right, this asterism inside of Ursa Major. And originally during the thesis at the time, I said, well, the 4 oxen could be these right here, creating the body of the plow. And then this constellation Butes, which in modern depictions of the constellation looks nothing like this, with the arm outstretched, right? Some do have the arm outstretched, but this is the Greek construction of the constellation. Butes, the cowherd, or often called the plowman or the herder, I suggest is pushing the plow across the night sky to the north. So you can see throughout the night, starts in the northwest at the beginning of the night, and the plow cuts so deep, look how her legs are now in the horizon. You see that?
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
The plow has cut deep as it is moving throughout the sky, right? And so now she has sunk into the horizon. And we know that the Big Dipper was called the plow, and is referenced as the plow.
So is the Big Dipper and the plow the same thing?
Correct.
Okay. All right. So that's going to save me next time I'm looking for both.
Which is also fun because in Norwegian, the Big Dipper is called Karlsvogna or Karlswagen, which then makes it all the more confusing.
Yeah.
No dipper here. It's a wagon all of a sudden.
Yeah, it could be a wagon. It could be
Or a
wagon.
cart.
Yeah, the man's cart. But that just goes to show you, right? Different locations, different peoples, different myths. And so that is what I suggested here. And then about 2 months ago, I was at the new building here that we have in Iceland called Edda, where they're housing the Arne Magnusson manuscripts. And I talked to Gisli Sigurdsson, who had then, we got back onto this talk of the Gefjun and the oxen from the north. And he said to me, you had suggested that it was right there in the north, the Big Dipper, the plow, and then Butes pushing it along. And I said, yeah. And he said, well, in the Codex Trajectonus, it doesn't say the 4 oxen, it says the 7. And lo and behold, he sent me some imagery here, and I looked into it as well, pulling up the manuscript, and it does indeed in Roman numerals say, she took 7 oxen out of the north. And what is interesting is that to the Romans, the Big Dipper, right, was known as the Septentrion, the 7 oxen from the north. And that it was, it's one of those things that if you see it there in the north, obviously it's winter because it's cold anyways, but this idea of where the northern winds come from, this is what the Romans had suggested, that it's coming from this area where they placed their wind deity Aquilo, related to the Greek Boreas. And I suggest that that is also related to Hreisvelgr, the eagle, which sits in the north and
Hmm.
blows cold winds over everybody. And there are some sources that I've found that suggest that the name, the original Greek name for this wind deity that was adapted by the Romans, Boreas, comes from the old Greek word meaning to devour. And if that is the case, then it makes sense that Hreisvelgr, the eagle sitting in the north, the corpse swallower, as his name means, the name ties into this devouring northerly winds. So this is an update from the thesis. This was not included in the thesis.
Okay. Oh, it's so fascinating.
This
It's
is
all.
intense.
Hmm. So, when, how, what would be the reason for the change between the four oxen and the seven?
What I could suggest there is that it's just different oral tradition. And this is something that often happens in oral tradition, right? It's not that there's necessarily a correct version. Like there's two myths in the Greco-Roman tradition. There's two myths of Hephaestus and why he gets thrown from heaven. And
Hmm.
one
Yeah.
is that he's lame of foot, and then the other one is he's helping defend his mom from Zeus, right? So in
Okay, yeah.
one, his mom loves him, and in the other one, his mom doesn't, right? So which
Yep.
version is correct? Well, it's not really that there's a correct. I think it's more of a two different ways of pointing at this certain area and what asterism we're actually looking at.
Yep.
Hmm. Perfect.
You want to talk about something a little bit more engaging? Here he is.
It's all engaging.
Here he is. And this is at least my favorite part of doing all this is figuring out why does Thor have two names, right? Why is he called Ökuthor and also Ausathor? Why is he called Driving Thor and Thor of the Aesir? Well, Driving Thor has two goats and a chariot, and the goats draw the chariot, right? And from this, he's known as Ökuthor. And an interesting thing about Ökuthor is that after one particular myth, he has these two servants that follow him for the rest of his days, Thjalfi and Röskva.
Hmm.
So if we look in the night sky, there's a very clear charioteer that we've previously discussed, and the constellation is pulled by the star called the Goat, and there are two
Ah,
children that follow him throughout the night.
Was that just a natural noise, that, Max?
yeah, I was connecting the dots.
It's just there.
So what I suggest is that Okuthor is this region of Auriga, and in GKS 1812 Quarto, it lists Auriga as Asar Bardagi, which the then scholars in the early 1900s had suggested could relate to what they would call Thor's battle, the battle of the god, who they in turn thought was Thor, because this constellation represents a charioteer and has a goat star and moves throughout the firmament at night. You can see it move throughout the sky. And I completely agree. I think the charioteer constellation could absolutely fit the description of Okuthor. It has a goat star, which in his book, Star Myths of the Vikings, once again, Björn Jonsson talks about this astronomical concept called duplicity, where any celestial object can be multiples of itself, right? So just because you have, let's say this star is called the owl star or something, it could also represent more than one owl. It could be an entire, what is it, parliament of owls or whatever it is, right?
Hmm.
And so here we see Auriga, and it would move from east to west overnight if we're facing south. And then right behind it are the twins, Gemini, which follow him for the rest of eternity. You see?
Hmm.
Huh.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see it.
Uh, it doesn't look as convincing if you use the modern depiction of Auriga, but there it is. You can see the older sort of depiction. But where it gets really cool is Alsathor, the Thor of the Aesir. And this is where Snorri also gets extremely descriptive. Now, oftentimes in astronomical interpretations of Norse myth, the planet Jupiter, I have found, is used for Thor. And unsurprisingly so, because in GKS 1812 Quarto, and also in, I think I had it in another manuscript actually, um, Thor is referenced as being Jupiter, right? The planets have Norse names. So it says, Jupiter, which we call Thor, and Mars, which we call Tyr. And what I've suggested in my research is that, for the most part, I think it's simply allegorical and simply has to deal with the fact that they may have just said, okay, well, what characteristics are like Mars? Okay, well, that would be Tyr. And I don't think it necessarily has anything to do with celestial movement. But
Mm.
that's for another topic. So I don't utilize Jupiter. I look where Snorri is describing. And Snorri tells us that he has three
Do you mean
possessions.
that you're looking for, like, you're basing your hypotheses off of evidence?
Well, yeah,
Like, well, like written hints instead of just going, well, this is a one-to-one direct.
to the defense of other interpretations, I suppose that it is, I mean, it does say, Jupiter equals Thor, so you can definitely say, hey, this works. And of course, in his work, it does work, but it didn't necessarily work for what I was suggesting and how I
Sure.
laid out the cosmos, right? And so, yeah, and of course, I wanted to go based on what is Snorri describing in Gylfaginning specifically.
Yep.
And he says that Thor has three possessions. He's got a hammer, he's got a belt of might, and he has iron gloves with which to wield this hammer. And he can't be without these things. And how I took that is, if you want to talk about Thor, you have to go to the constellation that is possessing all of these things. And we are told he walks through two rivers. He walks through rivers every day to get to the base of the tree, while the other gods take Bifrost. Now, one thing that pointed me to where to look was these two pictures here, these two illustrations from manuscripts, and I've listed the manuscripts and the leaf number and then also the year below for your reference. And if you look at Thor, he has his belt of might on, and just below it, you see three stars. See that on his waist? Right
Oh,
here.
okay, yeah. The one on the right, yeah.
And then here.
Oh,
Also on the left, yeah.
oh.
Okay.
Could they not be suns?
They could be suns.
Famously, stars are, suns.
Oh,
And
Usually.
so
all right,
another
yeah, good point.
another thing, in this version, Thor is wielding a scepter.
Hmm.
There was a picture earlier that we saw of a being that we know has three stars on their belt. And he was also wielding a scepter. And he was wielding a club. And he has a sword dangling, right? And so what I suggest is that Thor here is dressed as Orion.
Oh my
Okay.
God.
And if we look in the night sky, let's once again show, yes, this is the roof of Valhalla, but we know if we were looking at it, if we were looking due west, we would see it arch over us. We would see it as a tree standing straight up, right? And so here's the base of the tree. Can you see my cursor, by the way?
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
So there's the base of the tree. And then while the other gods may take Bifrost here, Thor, Orion, wades through rivers, and this constellation connected to his toe is actually called the river. It's Eridanus. So he's wading through his rivers. And one thing that we'll get to here in a minute is sometimes he fights a sea monster. And he's heading to the base of the tree. And he does it daily, as we discussed earlier, right? So this is something that we can see every day during the winter. And so this is
I've never been so silent.
yeah, this is what I'm suggesting. So this is a image from my thesis. I suggested that perhaps this is Mjolnir being held, but what could also be the case is that the star Betelgeuse, this red star here, could also be acting as both the glove and Mjolnir, such is the case in the myth of Njöruna, where Beetlejuice acted as both the club and his hand holding the club, right?
Hmm.
And then, of course, we have him wading the river here. Here's his belt of might. And then sometimes he throws his hammer, and it's very short-handled, right? And so if you look at the Pleiades, if you look at how the Pleiades looks at night, it is a very short-handled, what looks like to be a hammer.
Let me get in here. If anybody who can see my face.
Okay, could you again with the cursor? Could you describe it again, please?
So we're told he has three things, right? So he has a belt of might,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Orion's belt. He wields iron gloves, which
The,
help him hold the weapon, right?
the belt in those pictures and the fact there are 3 stars on it and there are 3 stars in the belt, right, is, I think, very damning.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. I've seen those pictures of Thor so many times and never noticed those stars.
And then, of course, we have what I suggest is Mjolnir being thrown, which is the Pleiades. And we'll take a look at that here in a bit. But if we keep that in mind, we can also take away the horizon. And if we took away the horizon, or if we simply went to Denmark, where we could see a little bit more of this constellation, we would notice this. And I tried, believe me, I was up till 5 in the morning the other night trying to find where I found this reference. I believe it was by Rudolf Simek in his 1954 book of Norse mythological terms. He suggests that Örmt and Körmt, the names for the rivers that he wades through, could potentially hint at a lost myth about Thor. But then I think later on he had said that he believes that the names could mean like serpentine and curved. And if we look at Eridanus, if we take away the horizon, it is very serpentine and curved.
Mm-hmm. So is that the river, the one
Yes,
that was known as the river, but then it carries on down
correct.
into this.
And then, of course, over here, we would expect the tree to be standing way over here to the west,
Yeah. Okay.
right? So there it is. Also, we get descriptions of Thor.
Also,
Yeah, we
Oh.
also get descriptions of Thor being in the east all the time, but Thor was in the east fighting trolls. But Thor was in the east fighting trolls, right?
Mm-hmm.
Orion rises in the east.
Okay. What about this little kind of deer-looking guy at Thor's feet?
This is a rabbit.
Oh, rabbit.
Yeah,
obviously, Dan.
this
I'm
is
sorry.
well, this is I believe it's a rabbit. It's not really used in any of my interpretations, but what you will see is that some of the constellations which are listed inside of the Old Norse manuscript are used. So we'll talk about Thor's fishing trip real quick. Let me go back to this image because I want to stress this. So here we have Orion. And then right below Orion here, we have this constellation that looks like a long serpent, and it is Cetus. It is labeled as Cetus, the sea monster. And we know that Thor fights a very famous sea monster that is also a serpent. And that is what we will talk about right here. So Thor's fishing voyage is perhaps one of the most well-known myths of all of Norse mythology. It is found in several poems. Okay, it's mentioned in Heimskringla, it's mentioned in Snorri's Edda, it's mentioned in Ragnarsdrapa and Husdrapa, and it is depicted on several pictorial stones. Here are the stones. If you'd like to look them up, you can see these. You can see images of what people believe to be Thor fishing. And then earlier I mentioned that the bull that he kills has a very celestial name, right? Heman Hrothr. And I believe I have it marked here, page 211. If we look at Hrota and I have it in, it's still from the first midterm I ever had. It's still in Christmas paper. I did it to identify which one was mine. But this is the Concise Dictionary of Old Icelandic by Geir Soega. If you're wondering, but it says Hrota can mean to fall, fly, be flung. And so it's interesting that his name is this heaven flinger or heaven flung or heaven flown maybe. And so I'll show you what I think the myth looks like. So if we're in the
I
sky
can't
at
wait.
night, Yeah, so if we're in the sky at night, let's imagine, and I didn't have the horizon move, but let's just imagine that right now the belt of Orion, which we
Hmm.
know to be called the Fiskikarlar, the fisherman, is in the shallow waters of the horizon. So just imagine with me that the belt is actually on the horizon. So the whole lower part of Orion is not visible.
Okay.
So, so the belt of Orion is also known as the fisherman.
Correct. It is absolutely known as the fisherman in
There's a
the.
lot of stuff here, isn't there? That just kind of overlaps.
Oh yeah.
Mm. So Ryan, I think we can just like at the present moment, just here and now, say we will need you back for another episode. Actually, if you would be open to that.
Hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I said this was going to be a long one, and we're 2 hours in. Um,
Yep.
You want me to finish this myth and then just
I
call?
I think we
yeah,
need to finish because we can't leave without
yeah, no,
Thor's
let's,
fishing trip and then
yeah,
go on to the
Absolutely.
Q&A
yeah,
because we also want to leave some fun tidbits for next time because I could sit there for hours.
yeah,
Oh,
I could, I,
absolutely. Yeah. So just imagine that the fisherman, the little boat that we have here, the Belt of Orion, is sitting on the horizon. And at the beginning of the myth, Hymir, the giant, says, "Well, Thor, if you want to go fishing, then you got to get some bait." And so he goes and he picks one of Hymir's oxes and or oxen, and then he kills it. And Snorri tells us that the ox's name is Himinhrotur. So here we have the horizon. Here we have our river, Eridanus. And here I have just drawn the horns of Taurus, right? And where they're connected to. I haven't drawn the full constellation of Taurus. I've just given you the horns to sort of show where the head of the bull is. Okay.
Okay.
And then we have the boat that sets out. And we are told that one of them sits at the prow and one of them sits at the stern, which we can see clearly there is one at the one end of the boat and one at the other end of the boat here. And that they begin rowing out. And Thor wants to row deeper, but Hymir is scared. But Thor says, no, we're going to row deeper. So now imagine the belt of Orion rising above the horizon. And then
Mhm.
eventually, when they get deep enough, Thor casts his line. And if you look right below the boat, we have this asterism, which is the sword or scabbard of Orion. And I suggest that this is the line that is being cast from the boat. And then Jormungandr appears, right? And he begins to take this head. Now, we are told here that the Midgard serpent took in the ox head and that the hook was in his gum. And if you look at the bottom jaw of Ketis, the notable feature of Ketis is that there is a red star in the bottom jaw, which I suggest could be the hook. And if you look in the head of the bull here, the star Aldebaran is also present. And so I suggest that what this is it's a tying in. There is the hook that was also in the bull's head, but now is in the jaw of Ketis, the sea monster.
so
Or
is that the star from the horn has moved across?
No, no, this is a still image. But what I'm suggesting is that celestially we can imagine, okay, I see a red star in the horns of Taurus. I see a red star in
Okay,
the
I'm with you.
bottom
Yeah.
jaw of the sea monster. There he is. He's taken the bait.
Okay, yeah, I
You
can see
see?
that. Yeah.
So he's taken the bait. Now we're told, and when the worm realizes this, and this is the word like flutter, but he thrashes about so hard that both of Thor's fists shoot overboard. Now, this is a very big movement thing. Remember earlier we talked about this movement of what's being said. And so what I suggest here is that this is now, we are being pointed toward the bigger asterism of what Orion is.
I think
His
I see. Yep.
Yeah, I can see them.
the
That's
hands
yeah.
are being shot overboard.
Hmm.
And then we're told that Thor becomes so angry that he grows in God's strength and he hangs on, right? And he pushes both feet
I
through
think
the
I see
bottom of the
them.
boat. Oh yeah, you see it. He pushes both feet through the bottom of the boat and down to the bottom of the sea, right? And he
Yeah.
brings the serpent up to the ship, and there are both of his feet through the bottom of the boat. So we have the boat being the belt, and now we have the arms and the hand. So now Thor, when he grows in God's strength, right? We already know this association with Orion because he's wearing the belt. And we know that he grows in God's strength when he puts on the belt. So now what I suggest is that Snorri, or whoever it is that's telling us this myth, is saying, okay, we've looked at the boat, but now we need a bigger god to fight this big celestial serpent. And so now we have it. We have a god of celestial proportions standing there facing this serpent. And then eventually we're told he throws the hammer at him and he sinks into the sea. Now there's a second interpretation that I am proposing, but I don't. I agree more with the Ketis one. I think the Ketis one is more plausible. But there is, and I know you had Matthias Norvig on the podcast at some point, and he talked about how Thor goes and fights a wolf. In Völuspá, it says Thor goes off to fight the wolf. But we know that he fights the serpent, so why does it say wolf? I am just proposing that maybe there is a celestial meaning, right? We know that this constellation found in Taurus's head, the Hyades, is called the wolf's jaw. And if we see that as being the mouth of the serpent that grabs the head of the bull, then it can not only be it could be acting right as a wolf in certain scenarios, right? In some scenarios it's a wolf, in some scenarios it's Jormungandr. So it could be a sort of poetic pun to the fact that he's fighting the wolf. It's a reference maybe to the wolf's jaw.
And it can be two things at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah, but what I think Ketis is more likely, especially since Orion is drawn, next to this long, lengthy Ketis in the manuscripts, and it fits nicely to the description that Snorri gives when he says that the serpent looks from below. And if we watch through the night and we watch Orion rise and set through the night, we see him start in sort of the eastern side of the sky, and he begins to raise up, and we see the serpent looking up at Thor from below. And then by the end of the night, Thor, it says, throws his hammer, which I suggest is the Pleiades, at the serpent, hitting him in the head and killing him in some versions of the myth. But in Snorri's version, he suggests that the serpent is still alive. Some scholars have proposed that maybe it's because Snorri needs him to be alive to talk about Ragnarok, which I think is absolutely plausible, right? So narratively, if we're looking at the myths literarily and narratively, we need him to be alive so that Thor can fight him later. But what I'm suggesting is that from an astronomical standpoint, it could simply be because we know that that constellation is going to come back the next night. You see?
Yeah. So the little bow that looks like Orion's holding.
Yeah.
What could
Thor,
that?
excuse you.
Sorry, the Thor is holding. What could that be? Could that be like a? Because it could be a hammer, I guess, with like a big, like the wraps on both sides.
I think, yeah, no, it absolutely could. It absolutely could be a hammer.
It looks
That's
like a
not-
pickaxe almost.
Yeah, yeah, it could be. I suggest that if you looked at it as the line for the serpent, it could be. But really, where I see that asterism, that particular part of the constellation coming into play, I don't necessarily see it coming into play with the myths about Thor, but I do see it coming into play with that guy,
All
which
right.
Oh,
we'll probably
next time.
we'll have to talk
Next
about next
time.
time.
Yeah, next
Because
time.
we have talked about Tyr losing his hand quite a bit. So this is on brand for us. We need to
yeah.
talk about this
I'm
next time.
exhausted. I don't know if I can take much more, Ryan.
I'm sorry. I hope.
No, it is good.
This is Ryan. You have officially, I think, exhausted both Dan and I, and that is perks to you, my friend.
Yeah. This is 240, 254 episodes.
There you go.
This is one of my top 5 episodes.
100%.
Without a
Oh,
doubt.
thank you.
Ryan, thank you so much. This has just completely blown my mind. And I want to get into, because we're going to do a Q&A after, and I want to
Yeah.
get into why you think this isn't just widely talked about, why I haven't heard this earlier, why me and Mags are having our mind blown now by,
Collectively,
by you.
simultaneously.
Why isn't this out there? The whole chat has just been, their minds blown. Everybody sees what you're saying. It's there. So,
Yeah.
things, the things line up. Obviously, you're looking for stuff. You can make things line up if you wanted to, but these things all kind of join up. There's something to it, whether people believe it completely or not. So I want to get into the Q&A as to why you think this is not.
That's
That's a little hint, guys. Go sign up for Patreon so you can listen to the Q&A episodes where we'll get into that.
Yeah, absolutely. Because this is so fascinating. And I know you said before, Ryan, that you thought this was, people see this as like a joke subject. And hopefully that's going to change, because this is absolutely fascinating.
no, I appreciate that.
I'm glad that it took so long to find somebody with such a vast
So that we can
knowledge.
find you.
Oh, thank you.
But that's it. It's not just, because when it comes to shows like this on the podcast, it's not just being able to have the knowledge and explain it. It's being able to explain it in a way that I understand it. It's primarily the thing of the podcast is to explain to everyday people. And you clearly have your knowledge. It's, you've learned so much. It's in there, and you're able to kind of get it across to us in such a good way that, I thoroughly enjoyed this. I can't give you high enough credit for this episode. I've loved it.
No, thank you. Thank you very
Also,
much.
the chat is going bananas.
Yeah, honestly, this is fantastic. Let's wrap it up so we can do a Q&A, because I know Max has to get out of here shortly as well.
Let's do it.
Ryan, where can people find you? I don't know if you have much of a social media presence. Well, no,
Yeah,
I know you
no,
do. I know. I see you commenting in those Facebook groups.
Yeah, I mean, look, you're always more than welcome to send me a message if you have any questions on Facebook. I usually try to answer back as quickly as possible. Like if you want any resources, open source sort of sites and stuff that we use in the scholarly community. I think that that's part of it, right? Is like making sure that this material is out there and accessible. And you can also send questions over academia.edu. I have a profile in there, and that's also where you can find my thesis that's available for download. And I did, to your point, Dan, try to write it in a way that it's not just so overly whelming, scholarly to where it's not really usable, but that people can pick it up and not know anything about this subject and have now an idea of how this stuff can be seen in the stars. So
Amazing.
Mags, where can people find you?
When I am online and post anything once in a blue moon, that's usually on Instagram. You can find me at ArcheoMags, Archeo with a K.
Perfect. And for me, it's Daniel_Farron1, Horns Voting for the Business, Nordic Mythology podcast for the podcast across the board, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. Definitely go to YouTube, watch this episode.
I think this is going to be a fun one to watch, because you're going to watch me and Dan having like multiple like moments.
Yeah, especially because the whole time I was just looking at the screen share, so the PowerPoint, so I couldn't see myself. So there were times where I was like inches off the camera. You can see all the pores in my nose, and I'm just in there like holy shit moments. So no, this has been awesome. Let's get to the Q&A and let people ask you some questions.
absolutely.